Para o Brasil, gente, a gente está aqui diretamente de Londres com a coordenadora do PT britânico, a Júlia, e com o Jeremy Corbyn, um homem que seria o primeiro-ministro britânico caso a mídia não tivesse orquestrado uma campanha de mentiras. Então a gente vai debater com ele um pouquinho sobre o que é que aconteceu, as similaridades entre o Brasil e o Reino Unido. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. This film started in 2016. It's our duty towards Brazil. Valnei and I live in London, and we wanted to do something for our country. And we saw our democracy slowly collapsing, and we wanted a tool for denunciation and also a historical register. This film has shown in cinemas in Brazil, in festivals around the world, has shown at the BFI. It has been a very, very long journey. I'm very glad to be here. This is obviously a very significant moment because we have elections in Brazil on Sunday. Yes, and Lula is set to win, hopefully, in the first round. And we're very grateful to have you as friends who are together with us in this battle. I'm going to pass it over to Julia. She's going to say a few words as well.
Yeah, hello everyone. I hope you really enjoyed the film. And I hope you were able to see some of the similarities between what happens in Brazil in terms of the media and what happens over here as well, because I personally think there's a lot of similarities in the way that the media treats subjects, treats people, treats politics, and it's almost a game for them. They do have a purpose, but it's also a game. And before we move on, and I'm going to pass it on to Jeremy, who's going to start this conversation. Again, reminding people that on Sunday we have an election, so we hope that this whole process of the coup against, first of all, President Dilma Rousseff, and I would like also to mention, I think she's brilliant. I thought she was brilliant in everything that she said over there. Be interesting to know what you think, if you thought the same as well. And hopefully we're getting to the end of a whole cycle of meddling with our politics, because that's what it was. That's what the coup was about, is meddling with our politics. And politics for me is something organic, it's something that grows, and the moment you start meddling with it, you get to places that perhaps you don't want to get to, like Bolsonaro, or like what we have nowadays in the UK as well, which isn't quite Bolsonaro, but it isn't great as well.
Thank you, and welcome to Islington's newest cinema at the Bedford here. Thank you, John, and thank you all of the team at the Bedford for accommodating us here tonight. I have seen the film before when we showed it in Southwark. Absolutely fantastic. And what it shows is the power, the unbelievably unaccountable power of very wealthy people running mainstream media to turn people into villains, to repeat lie after lie after lie, which eventually becomes common currency and common parlance. And so, obviously, I'm here to support Lula in the election. Hope to goodness he wins on Sunday. Woo! And I've got the shirt to prove it. And if he doesn't win on the first round on Sunday, which I hope he does, I had an invitation today to be sure to be in Brazil for the second round, and you can be sure I'll be there for the second round to support Lula. And I have to say a big thank you to Lula for the way that he's campaigned over all the years that he did, long before he became president. And I remember going to Brazil for the election that he didn't win. I think it was 1998. I found myself at a very large PT rally in Sao Paulo, and I thought it was going very well, and I discovered there were other people apparently from the UK Labour Party there. But unfortunately it was Peter Mandelson who was at another rally supporting another party. So not for the first time in our lives, Peter Mandelson and I were not on the same platform. And Lula then fought and won the election. And the reduction, nay elimination of poverty in some areas of Brazil was his doing. The attacks on him were unbelievable and monstrous from those media. And the lawfare that was used against Lula, which ended up with him being imprisoned. And I thought it was fantastic when last weekend he went to the town he had been imprisoned in, and tens of thousands of people turned out to welcome him back. That shows the strength of support for him and for the PT. Dilma became president, won the election, and was then systematically attacked and undermined, again by the same unaccountable media and the lawfare that was used against her. And after she had lost the presidency, and Bolsonaro eventually became president, Dilma didn't rest. She travelled the world telling people the story of what happened in Brazil, and during my leadership of the Labour Party, she visited the UK several times and had a number of very interesting economic and other conferences with us. And I had a very long conversation with her when I was in Chile for the inauguration of Boric about the challenges facing any left president in Latin America of the global corporations, of the super rich, and above all, of the media. I obviously hope that Lula wins on Sunday. That's why we're all here, if not in the next round. But we've got to remember that winning an election is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And those that will then attack him and his government will be very rich and very powerful vested interests that want to protect their wealth, their privilege and their power. And that is why all of us that want so fervently Lula to win also want to see, as Glenn Greenwald and others have pointed out, a media discourse that does give us democratic media, does give us all a voice in the media. I'm not asking for journalists to give politicians or those in office an easy ride. That's not what it's about. Questioning, challenging, fine. That is what good journalism is about. Telling the truth is what good journalism is about. And it's not about putting Julian Assange in prison and threatening him with removal of the United States. It is about supporting real journalism. And so let's remember all that as we send our message of support to the people of Brazil. I can only imagine what dirty tricks are being planned at this very moment on the eve of the election when Lula is doing so well in the campaign. It's happened before and will no doubt happen again. And so to those people in Brazil that are watching and listening to us here tonight in this packed venue in North London, where we're sending our support and our solidarity from our multicultural, multiracial, multilingual society here in North London, our solidarity with the people of Brazil. Be strong against the rich and the powerful that do not want you to be a country that eliminates poverty, that gives real hope to every child in Brazil, and protects the natural world and the Amazon rainforest from those that would burn it down and destroy it, thus damaging your lives and the lives of the rest of the planet. Our solidarity is with you. So from here tonight, here in North London, we have one simple message. And if you could all repeat with me, Viva Lula. One simple message. Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Lula!
I'd like to talk about about media regulation. So the BT never implemented the so-called media regulation, and Lula says it himself when he's in prison. That's a self-criticism I do. And Brazil often looks upon the UK as a role model of media balance. Countries, well, there are certain media balance regulations in the UK, and they look upon Argentina as well. They look upon other countries. My question is, does media regulation also work? Because we are in a country with allegedly robust media balance laws, and we've seen many people become victims of smear campaigns, and even more, people becoming the victims of lawfare campaigns, which are duly supported by the media. So if that happens, even in countries with strong regulations such as the UK, what is it that we can do to achieve real media balance? If the big media are all in the hands of millionaires, what is it that we can really do to change that? And it's a question for both of you, Julia and Jeremy.
I think it is something that in Brazil, especially the left, talks a lot about. It's in fact something that Lula says all the time. He says, look, we're not looking for something totally different. We just want to have in Brazil what they have in the UK, in the USA, in terms of regulation. But I think that what we have in the UK is exactly the same in Brazil, because the situation is very similar, where you have a handful of people who own the media, and these people are very rich, as we've already said. They also cozy up to the people in power, which is exactly the same situation we have in Brazil. And in the UK, people can. The UK looks so sensible. You know, things are so sensible here. Things can't happen like it happens in Brazil. We couldn't possibly have a coup in the UK. We couldn't possibly have a dictatorship in the UK. And we couldn't possibly have, you know, those horrible things that happen in places like Brazil, like corruption and all that. That happens in other parts of the world. It doesn't possibly happen here in the UK. But to be honest, I think we're pretty much very close to seeing in the UK what we see in Brazil. But the interesting thing about what happened in Brazil, yes, we had a lot of lies and manipulation. We had a lot of people were taken in by all this, you know, ever since, like, right from the beginning, before Lula even became a candidate for president. People were saying things about him, stories about him, investigations about him, let alone when he got into power. But eventually, at some point, the truth comes out. And the truth came out to the Brazilian people, so much so that we are on the verge of winning in the first round, which is not something that happens very often in Brazil. And the reason why this is happening is because people are feeling on their skin, they're feeling it themselves, what it means to have a government like Bolsonaro, to have all their rights destroyed, all their policies dismantled. And I really think that perhaps we're getting more or less to the same point in the UK, you know. I mean, in the last week has been unbelievable, really, what we've seen. I was going past the TV and I had to sort of look twice when I read something that said the Bank of England is intervened into the pound, so, you know.
Yeah, the Bank of England intervened to protect us from the government. I never thought I'd find the day when I welcomed anything the Bank of England did. But there we go. But the serious point about the media is a number of things. One is, yes, the control by a small number of huge media owners. You know, you think in terms of Fox News, think in terms of the big private channels around the world, think Globo TV in Brazil. But it's also two other unpleasant things that happen. One is the self-censorship of many journalists around the world, because they're frightened that what has happened to Julian Assange might happen to them. They're frightened of the number of real journalists that have been killed in Mexico, in Colombia, in India, in Egypt, and so many other places around the world for trying to expose the truth about corruption. But we need to, yes, challenge an awful lot of that, but challenge the news values that go with it, and the way in which we are fed a diet that real news is what happens in Europe or the United States. If something happens in Africa and Latin America, it's not really news unless British people are affected by it. And that happens a great deal. But the last thing I'd simply say is this: we have the technology available through the internet and everything else to find out almost anything at a moment's notice and find out something of what is happening anywhere in the world at the moment. And the brilliance of those technicians that manipulate this through algorithms drives us into certain places and certain directions. And so when you turn on your phone, you think you're turning on your phone innocently to find out what's going on. Many people simply don't realise they're being directed into what they ought to know. And this system was used to devastating effect by the right in Australia, by the right in the United States, certainly by Bolsonaro, and certainly by the right in this country, to spread, often through private, closed Facebook and WhatsApp groups and chat groups, the most foul and disgusting lies and rumours about people on the left, which then gradually build up with a common currency. So be very aware that this technology gives us an illusion of freedom, but in reality is something that can be used to control us. And through the Peace and Justice Project, we've set up news clubs in various towns and cities around the country to have serious local discussion and debate about news values and the values of news reporting that goes with it. And I hope that obviously Lula wins, and I hope he is able to build up a genuinely free and accountable media in Brazil as an example to the rest of the world, because the opportunity now in Latin America with left governments in a number of countries who are standing up towards the multinationals and the global corporations that simply want to carry on what has been going on for the last 200 years, which is taking away the natural resources of Latin America at a low price in order to keep the people impoverished and turn the profits into tax havens somewhere else. Lula winning in Brazil would be an absolute game changer across the whole continent, and I can't wait to see Lula back as president, working in concert with other people such as those in Chile and Colombia and Mexico, because there is a huge way forward. And let's give a shout out to the people of Bolivia for everything they went through, the lawfare they went through, and the victory when they turned against them later on.
Well, we talked about the right-wing media. They're our enemies, they're owned by millionaires, but we have enemies elsewhere. I worked 7 years for a newspaper called The Guardian. They call themselves left-wing. They supported the Iraq war. Their coverage of the Brazilian coup was shambolic. On the day before the coup, Dom Phillips, incidentally the same guy who was murdered, he wrote a piece saying that Brazil sees hope in the vice president. The day before Dilma was removed, that was the headline in The Guardian. So, I mean, and we've seen what The Guardian has done to Jeremy Corbyn. So, I mean, with Julian Assange, I mean, with friends like these, I mean, who needs enemies? So, they're not, and they are allegedly independent, run by the Scott Trust, but they do serve the interests of the establishment. The ones that can make a real difference are the independent media, and we have a lot of powerful independent media. This is being broadcast by one of the largest independent channels in Brazil, with 1 million followers. So. Channels like 247 and Media Ninja and Jornalistas Livres, they are incredibly powerful in Brazil. And we don't have an equivalent in the UK. Well, we do, but to a much smaller extent. Those are guerrilla media. They are incredibly powerful. So I think a way forward is empowering, creating an environment that's healthy for these counter narratives to blossom and to get a different message to the people, which doesn't come through the television, will come through the mobile phones. Obviously, The Guardian are not going to help us. In Brazil, Globo and Record are not going to help us. On Record, the second TV channel in Brazil, which are owned by evangelicals, just a very interesting fact. They are the worst ones. They're worse than Globo. They are completely aligned with Bolsonaro, because Globo doesn't like Bolsonaro on the identity topics. So Bolsonaro is deeply reactionary, so Globo finds that a bit awkward. So that's why they start to oppose Bolsonaro in some ways. But Record, they are extremely deeply reactionary. And you know what? The images of TV Record were recorded 100 meters from here, because that's where the headquarters are. And what used to be the Odeon Cinema is now the Universal Churches of Kingdom of God, just 100 meters down from here. You saw the images in the film. So these dangerous evangelical churches are coming across in the Atlantic. They're big in Africa, and they are far more dangerous than Global.
I just wanted to talk about my own experience with The Guardian. When we started having the coup, when things started to move in Brazil, I'm a middle-class, middle-aged woman who lives in Islington, so The Guardian is my newspaper, was my newspaper. And I just couldn't believe what I was reading in there. I was reading it every day, and I was thinking, gosh, if this is what they're writing about something I know, and about a country I know, I just wonder what they're writing about places I don't know. And I think that's really sad, because it unbalances you about everything else, because then you start questioning everything that you read that is coming from. I no longer have much courage to talk about things like the Ukraine, because I can't, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but I can't believe, because I don't trust the media sources that come to me. And that's been done because of the way that something was portrayed to me about something I knew, which was my own country. And beyond that, I have to say, I'm going to say something. I was the person who was Dilma's interpreter in The Guardian that day. I spent with her, she spent with me 2.5 hours sitting in a round table with all of The Guardian and the Observer's editors there, talking. She was talking. And she was basically saying, she said two things. She said, first of all, Bolsonaro, if what's happening to Brazil, and that was before Bolsonaro's became a president. She said, the coup in Brazil is not going to lead to the defeat of the left. Far from it. The left is going to survive. What is going to lead to is to the defeat of the center right. And this is exactly what happened in Brazil. And when we went back to The Guardian after weeks and weeks and nothing came out, no interview, nothing, and we asked The Guardian, hang on a second, why is it that you're not going to publish anything about him? Oh, she's got absolutely nothing interesting to say, is what they said. Apart from the fact that she also, as she said in the documentary here, she asked them, she said, listen, this is what's happening to Lula, blah, 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 blah. And, I'm not asking you to believe me, but you are the main investigative newspaper in the world. So how about you going to Brazil and investigating this? Which is something that they never did as well. And just one more thing. I have never pointed to any names in The Guardian. I never mentioned any one of their writers. I have talked a number of times about what I feel about the newspaper in itself. But guess what? The other day a tweet was sent round about Brazil and the Amazon, and I can't remember what it was. But I've suddenly found out that Tom Phillips, who's the main Guardian Latin American correspondent, has blocked little me. I was really quite astonished by that, to be honest, you know. But there you are. And yeah, so that's my story of The Guardian.
Well, I'm writing a chapter of a book I'm doing about the media, and I have to keep stopping because it makes me so angry when I realise what the media have done to people and public opinion and demonising of people in our society. But I want this event this evening to be one of hope and one of optimism. You've seen an analysis in this brilliant film by Victor and all the other team.
In Varney.
Yes.
A film by Victor and Varney.
I agree. I agree, absolutely. You're not it's a joint enterprise, I get that, sorry. But let's be strong and be optimistic about it. But it's not about just sending good wishes to Lula. Obviously we want to win. It's what happens after inauguration on January the 1st next year. It's what happens with the undermining of that government. It's what happens with the way the media report it in this country and other countries as well. And that is where we come in. We've got a lot of access to independent media, thinking of all the different, in each one not very large in its coverage, but add them all up, it comes to quite a few million people that access these things. It's up to us then to be regularly telling people what the government is trying to do, give them our support and our solidarity, and give that solidarity to that whole cultural shift that is happening right across Latin America. It is of global significance. I'm astonished, but not surprised, what you just said about the interview The Guardian gave with Dilma. And for somebody who'd been president to give 2.5 hours to a major newspaper for a serious discussion and interview. I've spent time with Dilma, quite a lot of time with Dilma, listened very carefully to everything she said. She is a brilliant, perceptive analyst of the political scene in Brazil, brilliant analyst of the whole economic issues facing Brazil and how you deal with poverty and eliminate poverty in Brazil. What a fantastic woman. The idea that the Guardian couldn't find anything interesting from her in 2.5 hours is utterly astonishing. I've got a feeling they were more interested in silencing her and wasting her time than actually reporting the real alternative that's being offered to the people of Brazil. But the PT campaign has got through, and I'd say this about the PT as well. Having got to know them almost from their foundation, they do politics in a very different way. It is totally community-based. It is the strength of the party in the community. The combination of trade union, industrial and local activities, along with political activities, is what changes minds and helps to get minds going past the headlines of the mainstream media. That is the way to change things politically, and I hope to goodness we win on Sunday. But I'll just finish with this. I asked the Colombian campaigners for land rights, trade union rights, women's rights, children's rights, and all the other rights campaigners 2 days before the election in Colombia, what they would do if they didn't win the election 2 days later. And they said, we'll go out and campaign for workers' rights, for land rights, for women's rights, for the redistribution of wealth and power. And I said, what will you do if Petro and Francia win the election on Sunday? They said, we'll go out and campaign for workers' rights, land rights, and all the other things. We will not stop and we will not give up. And I know the people of Brazil will not stop and will not give up either. Let's hear it for Lula. Viva Lula.
Well, a piece of useful information for the people in Brazil. The film, The Coup d'Etat Factory, A Fantástica Fábrica de Golpes, has been made available for free until election day. in Portuguese only, the Portuguese version. So all Brazilian people should watch this film and share it as broadly as you can, so that others can understand how the media brainwashed them. My second comment is on the environment. This country has started to hate Bolsonaro, and I have a lot of respect for the environmentalists, and the environment is obviously a very important topic, but Europeans tend to look at Latin America through thick colonial glasses, and they didn't pay attention to Bolsonaro when he got elected. It's only once Bolsonaro stopped burning down the Amazon, it's only when the environmental theme became more prominent that people started seeing Bolsonaro for who he is. We, Julia, I, Corbyn, for a long time have been saying this man is synonymous with destruction. He's rapidly homophobic, sexist, he's an apologist of the dictatorship. He says the dictatorship should have killed 30,000 people in order to succeed. He has held a gun saying we should shoot the opposition. So how is it that someone who has no respect for democracy and human life would pay any attention to the environment? So my message to you is, pay attention. The environment is very important, but if people realize how dangerous Bolsonaro is in first place years earlier, then we wouldn't be making all these documentaries about how Bolsonaro is destroying the Amazon, because a man who doesn't care about people is not going to care about the nature. It's as simple as that.
I'm going to make my last comment about the media, and then talk a little bit about Bolsonaro and the need for Lula to win. The way that the media sort of in the UK looks at the rest of the world is as if politics doesn't exist. You know, sort of you have all these people out there and they're doing whatever they are in their corrupt little way, and then suddenly something happens. Bolsonaro pops out, and he pops out like a mushroom out of nowhere for the people who don't know anything, because that's how the media portrays it. They don't tell you like they've been, you know, what's been going on, and it's been a struggle for so long, and it's been a struggle in the Amazon for a very long time between massive landowners and the indigenous people and the landless peasants and all the other traditional peoples who are over there. They don't tell you about any of this. So you just suddenly happen in Brazil to have this very odd man who suddenly pops out. The BBC documentary is a little bit like that. They sort of, the only reason that they give for Bolsonaro to be there is religion, and they try to equate it as if it's something out of, like in the USA, you know. And yes, is religion important in Brazil? It's extremely important. Has religion helped Bolsonaro get where he is and is maintaining his power? Yes, it's true. But one of the main reasons that Bolsonaro is where he is because they try to destroy politics in Brazil. It's because they try to destroy the left. It's because of the way that Moro and the car wash operation suddenly came along and did what they did to destroy politics as they were. Having said all this, and I know I'm taking my time, but I think if Bolsonaro were to win, and I'm saying were to win with a lot of hope, it will be the destruction of the environment, not just for Brazil, but for everyone. So I think he's absolutely extremely dangerous. And also to say that Lula doesn't have to win simply because he is the opposite to Bolsonaro. It's not, oh my God, we need somebody else, so we're going to go for Lula, like a lot of Brazilians are doing. The reason why we need to have Lula is because Lula is the right man to lead Brazil, because he's somebody who will take care of the environment. He understands that you need to have a green transition, that you need to move somewhere else. He understands that you need to think about work and the place of work in our society, and that you cannot sort out the environment unless you start talking about the place of the worker in our society and the place of consumption in our society, and what is that relationship and the relation with exports in our society. And another very important reason why we need to elect Lula is because Lula also believes in a multipolar world and a world of peace, because there's hardly any voices in the world at the moment with the strength of somebody like Lula who talk about peace. Because in this war that we're going through at the moment, and it's not the only war that we have in the world, we have a lot of other wars that are never mentioned, nobody is talking diplomacy, nobody is talking peace, and that is extremely important. I'm just going to mention, I'm sorry, I have one more thing to say, because we have somebody here in this room, and unfortunately he hasn't yet learned English, but he's a Congolese refugee who went to live in Brazil, much like Chris Kaba came to England. And the same way that Chris Kaba was murdered, Shadrach, who's here, his cousin, was murdered, Maurice, in Brazil. And because he was the spokesman of his family over there, he had his life targeted, and for that reason he's now had to come to the UK as a refugee. And that is a war that nobody hardly ever talks about, which is what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I'd just like to call him up if I can.
Maybe he's maybe he left. Final notes.
I think we'd have to finish this section in a moment. Could I just conclude with this thought? The left movement across Latin America is often presented as a sort of aberration in politics, a rejection of neoliberalism and so on. Yes, it is all of that, but there's something much more fundamental about it. It is a cultural change, it is a change in attitude towards the natural world and the environment. So when Lula and others say they're going to end the burning of the Amazon rainforest for the short-term gain of growing a bit of soya and the expulsion of indigenous people from there, that is important, but it's also about the greening of the economy, the moving away from an extraction-based, unsustainable economy. Exactly the same debates and arguments going on in Chile, in Bolivia, in Colombia, and in Ecuador, where there is a much more right-wing president. These issues are absolutely mainstream in debate there. And it's got to happen, because if we want the next generation to have a decent, sustainable existence, it will be achieved by using the technology we've got to protect the natural world on which we all depend and create real sustainability in this world. And it's that movement that is equally part of that whole cultural shift. If you want to try and understand anything about Latin America and the genius that went before the Spanish and before independence, and indeed before all the global corporations took over, is I would urge everyone to read The Open Veins of Latin America by Eduardo Galeano. He explains that whole historical narrative. This is the time of real hope and real change, and a victory for Lula on Sunday will confirm real hope and real change. Let's go for it.
Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Lula! Viva Jeremy Corbyn!